Good afternoon, Sybille. Thank you for joining me for this interview on community building. And I'm Eve Berry, and I'm with Nautilus Leadership Services. And my guest today is Sybille Foppa. And just tell us a little bit about yourself before we begin talking about community building, Sybille.
Yeah, hi. So what to say? I have been in an ongoing community building group with Eve for well over a year now. And it's been really quite the adventure. And I'm very honored to be invited to this meeting today. I've been a part of community building for a really long time, and it's something I'm really passionate about. So I look forward to being able to talk more about it.
Perfect, thank you. So tell us how you first learned about community building, when it was, how you learned about it. Everybody's got a great story about how they learned.
Right. I don't know how great mine is, but it is a bit different because most of the time when I've been in community building workshops with people that I don't know, they say, oh, I came across one of Scott Peck's books and, you know, the rest is history sort of thing. And for me, it was quite different. It was actually my first husband who somehow discovered Scott Peck and his work, and I don't remember how. This was in the late 80s, so probably before the internet. So he may have heard something on the radio or come across one of his books. I don't really know. In any case, he was interested and he went to a weekend workshop and came back really filled with the experience. And from there, he joined an ongoing group that had already been going for some time. And I wasn't at first sure that that was something I wanted to do, but eventually he did invite me to come along, and I thought, okay, can't hurt to try. And actually it was a bit of an attempt to improve communication between us. We were struggling in our marriage, and I thought that actually made sense for us to try and find some new ways to relate to each other. Sadly, it didn't work out, but the community building stuck, unlike the marriage. So,
good. So that's been quite a while then.
It has been quite a while. I was trying to remember the exact year, and I can't, but I do remember being pregnant with my second child not too long after I joined, and the group kind of holding me and kind of sending nice thoughts to my pregnant belly and so on. And so I'm guessing I was not even 30. I just turned 60. So that would have been over 30 years ago.
Yeah, it's a while. It's pretty early on too. So
Yeah.
you mentioned going to a workshop, you mentioned being in an ongoing group back then, and then I know you're in the ongoing group, another ongoing group. So what are the different ways that you've been involved with community building over the years?
Yeah, so the first weekend workshop actually was, I believe, after I had joined the ongoing group. My memory is a little fuzzy on this, and you know, there was pregnancy involved at some point, so I don't recall exactly. But really the bulk of it has been in my ongoing group. I have been to a handful of live workshops over the years. And then more recently, I've participated in a lot of the Zoom weekend workshops. And the ongoing group that I joined about 30 years ago, if not a little more, that has been going all along. I did leave it at one point, and that actually was related to the difficulties between my then ex-husband and myself, because we were both part of the same group, and it really wasn't community building that was happening between us at the time. And it was sadly also then my first experience of sometimes you can't build community with everyone. And so eventually I made a decision to leave the group. And I did rejoin a number of years later. And I will say, although at the time there was no community building possible between my ex-husband and myself, I think ultimately it was community building that brought us back together as friends. So, I mean, yes, the group itself, but also being able to use the principles to talk to each other again and to process some of the things from the past and so on. So even though at the time we couldn't use it to help our relationship or our co-parenting, years later, it did come full circle, and we're now, I think, really good friends. And so, yeah, so that's, I guess, mostly how I've been involved. And the other way I've been involved, like I mentioned at the beginning, for well over a year now, is in the ongoing other group that formed from one of the Zoom weekend workshops. And that's been an entirely different but equally exciting experience. Yeah, and has challenged me in entirely new ways.
So you've been a part of both the intense weekend long events, both in person and on Zoom, as well as two different ongoing groups. And so I'm really interested in your perspective on the differences, if any, between the intensive weekend experience and the more spread out ongoing group formats.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good question. I enjoyed thinking about that. And I think the biggest difference, of course, is that you get to know the people in the ongoing group, and I've come to care deeply about the people in both of my groups, no matter where I started with them, because in the beginning, there were people who rubbed me the wrong way and wasn't sure that I really wanted to be in a group with them. And over time, that really, really changed, so that now these people are a huge part of my life. Even though some of them I'll probably never meet in person from the Zoom group, but they're here to stay in my heart. And that, of course, is very different. Like when I come to a weekend workshop, although I always know some people, but the strangers in the room, they are people that initially I don't have much investment in. I mean, I do in a sort of general way, just because they've chosen to come to this workshop, but as individuals, I have my judgments, and sometimes I'm not very interested in them. And that does change almost always over the course of the weekend, but it's still not the same. And so I guess there's a freedom that comes with that. I might be more inclined to confront someone if I don't like what they're saying, and or how they're conducting themselves in the workshop. And although it's always scary, but it's way more scary when it's with people that I have an ongoing relationship with. And so that's one of the big differences. The other difference I would say is there's, over time, I would say in both of the ongoing groups, there is a level of community that's always there. So we don't start from ground zero every time. And so that's very comforting. It doesn't make the process necessarily easier or less scary. But again, it's for instance, more difficult for me to have conflict with someone if I'm upset with something they've done or said. So I guess, and in terms of intensity, I thought about that. I thought, well, are the ongoing groups a little less intense? Because with the group of strangers, you go from zero to sometimes pretty deep community in the span of, I don't know, 2.5 days. But I thought back on some of the group meetings in my ongoing groups, and I would have to say that can be really intense too, on all levels. Like the chaos can still be quite intense, and the sense of community can be profound and profoundly moving. So in terms of intensity, I guess not so much. Yeah, I would say they're both capable of creating those incredible, profound experiences.
Well, it's interesting because you're pointing out some real differences between the two formats, if you will, and that if it's a workshop and there's strangers, you're going from not being in community to hopefully having a sense of community. In the ongoing group, as you said, you already are in community as a foundation, which within that you can still experience the stages, like some chaos or you know, the more surface level, what we call pseudo community, or the emptying process. But the foundation of community is always there, is what you're saying. And that certainly is a big difference, rather than getting to community kind of at the end.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And I guess in terms of pseudo community, I would say, especially with my long-term group, there is definitely a lot less of that. In fact, I would say there's very little pseudo community, if any. We always start out from a point of pretty deep connection, and it's rare that somebody would say something that I would think like, yeah, this really doesn't contribute anything, like even outside of circle, I feel. And I feel we're getting there with the newer group as well. It's taken some time, and sometimes we still fall back into pseudo community, but less and less so, I would say. Yeah.
Well, and of course, with the ongoing group you've been a part of for many years, that's many years versus a relatively shorter period of time, a year, which still feels like a long time. So
yeah. By the way, I did think of just one more way in which I have been involved in community building, and that is with my ongoing group, the long-term group. We also have been doing like not weekly, annual weekend retreats. For most of the life of the group, they were in person, and we have done a couple on Zoom. And I know that's not completely different, but it is different from, again, a weekend workshop with strangers. And it has certainly allowed us to deepen our community, and also to have that opportunity that you talked about in your interview that you did with Tivadar, about the opportunity to sort of socialize outside of the circle. And normally when it's the ongoing group meeting once a month or whatever, or in our other group once a week, there isn't that opportunity, right? And so when we've done weekends, then we've been able to do that as well, which definitely helps to deepen the community.
Yeah, I would think that's kind of an ideal format to have that ongoing experience with people, so you have that foundation, but then you can get the benefits of that more intensive, longer term. I don't mean longer term, but longer lasting, because 2 hours of community building, or however long it is, can go by very quickly, almost when you're just getting to the point where you like to spend more time. Then, okay, time's up and it's late.
Yeah.
So that's ideal to combine the two. And the fact that you all have stuck with that's pretty impressive. I don't know of any other group that has operated as long as your group.
Yeah, there's still some of the, I think some of the original people are still there, not very many, and there's certainly been turnover over the years. And then more recently, we haven't really had any new members join us. So we're a fairly small group at this point, but still going strong.
Well, I wanted to just make one other point from what you said, which you were talking about the differences in risking, that even though it's always risky to confront somebody or to bring something up that maybe you feel you need to voice in the weekend workshop, it's riskier if with people you know and you already have relationships with. And yet that's more like real life, isn't it?
Yes.
Where it's it's just where it's always hard. I'm just speaking for myself. It's always harder for me to bring up something with somebody I really care about and love. It's more important that I do that than a stranger.
Yeah.
But in the end, it's worth it. So that in that way, that being able to do it in the ongoing group, it certainly gives me more experience doing it in my real life when I need to.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. And I would also say that although sometimes it does feel more difficult because there's more at stake, in a way it also feels safer, because there is that
Mhm.
level of trust, right?
True.
And I know we all have the same goal around our time together. And so I have a fair bit of faith that if I speak from my heart, that it will be
Mhm.
received in the spirit in which I put out the message.
Well, you may have already answered this in part, but I'm going to go ahead with it, which is, and you're definitely an example of this. Why have you stayed involved with this for
Yeah,
all these years?
right. Well, I mean, the simplest way to put it is I can't imagine my life without community building. I don't even know who I would be if I hadn't been doing this work all these years. And yeah, it's as much part of me as, I don't know, like my eye color or
Mhm.
what I
Mhm.
do for a living or anything. It's just become part of me.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I can certainly relate to that and feel the same way. It's
Mm,
just, what? You couldn't, what?
yeah.
How could you not do it? Like you
Right.
said. So, um, I know I'm exploring this question with people who are more newcomers to community
Mm.
building, as well as those folks who have been involved for much longer. And how do you really see the benefits of community building?
Oh, how much time do you have? Uh, yeah, one of the things that I'm very aware of is the family I grew up in did not have language to share vulnerable feelings or anything like that. Anger was expressed quite freely, but anything that was more tender, more vulnerable was not spoken in my family. And community building gave me uh, a structure and a language to be able to be present with myself in a different way and to be able to express what is in my heart. And so in a way, it became my love language.
Mm,
And yeah, I had done some work on myself before. I had done therapy, and I had become a mother before I became involved in community building. And so I had worked very hard to develop the ability to speak from my heart, and especially to share with my children just my feelings and talk about difficult things and listen to their feelings. But I really feel that community building gave me just again a structure and a
mm,
language to
mhm,
really do that skillfully, and it has extended into every part of my life, relating to myself and to others in this way. I think the concept of extraordinary respect is probably one of my favorite ones.
mm,
And I really always try to keep that in mind. Yeah, but just before Christmas, my daughter and I were out for a walk. It was late at night and it was really cold. And there was this man who was clearly not in a good state. He was sort of not stumbling around. He was not inebriated or something, but he was just kind of wandering and looking for help. And I won't go into the whole story, but I really believe that the fact that I was able to approach him rather than shy away from him was due to, again, all this work that I've done to always treat people with respect, extraordinary respect, to not shy away. And we were able to provide him a little bit of help and comfort in the end. And yeah, and I still remember him. And I think even that encounter was probably as meaningful to me as it was to him. I
mm,
would say that's a lot to do with
mhm.
all this community building work I've done.
Well, it sounded to me like the exposure and experience and just living it has has opened the door to what does it mean to be a really good human being. Sounds so simple,
Yeah.
but how often do we experience something other than that? Certainly in the world we're living in right now. There's an awful lot of a lot of people treating each other differently than being fellow human beings.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's powerful. So tell us a little bit about the work you do professionally when you're not doing community building.
Yes. So I have a degree in psychology, and I do psychotherapy with adolescents, sometimes for families, but mostly just with the adolescents who have pretty severe psychiatric issues. I mean, they're functional enough to be living in the community, but they're pretty troubled souls. A lot of them have significant trauma, often complex ongoing childhood trauma, and they're often still living in environments that are very toxic for them, and very where they're not supported, where they're not respected. And yeah, and I would say that there too, community building has had a profound effect on how I do this work. Yeah, and I had only been a therapist for a few years before I encountered community building and started to participate in it. And so it's hard for me to even separate, like, again, who I would be as a therapist without community building, but it definitely has had a profound impact on the way I relate to people, the way I listen to people, the way I respect them. And whenever I get feedback, and sometimes actually my clients who sadly age out at a certain point, so sometimes the work isn't done and I have to pass them on or discharge them anyway. But sometimes I hear from them years later, and I would say, generally speaking, they all say the same thing. And they say, you listened to me, you respected me, you were there as a human being. And sometimes they say, I've never found that in another therapist. And yeah, and I do think I'm there authentically and deeply, and I don't hide. I mean, obviously I have professional boundaries. I'm not going to, go into like sharing, all my stuff with my clients. So I do have good boundaries, which, by the way, I think community building helps with as well, and having good interpersonal boundaries. But yeah, I think it's allowed me to be present in an entirely different way. And I do think my clients feel that. Just recently, a client that I hadn't even seen very long, she decided to stop therapy. And in those cases, I always ask, is it something about me that didn't work for you, or something, in my approach or whatever? And she said, no, not at all. Like, I'm just doing much better. I don't need therapy anymore. And then she said, no, great, talking to you was great, because you were the first therapist who treated me like a human being. And then she said something to the effect of, and you were there as a human being too, like you sometimes giggled about stuff, and yeah, so she was really just saying I was very present and I was authentic. And that is true for me, and it makes my work infinitely more rewarding, and I think easier too.
Yeah, it's so important. I imagine so many people think that they come to a therapist to get fixed somehow. And I know from the community building work that we do, you learn pretty quickly that the only person you can fix is yourself. And then no amount of advice or suggestion or fixing that we provide others can work in the same way as if we discovered ourselves. So it sounds like you've really taken that to heart and integrated that as well. You actually,
that's a good way of putting it.
You actually really answered the question about, how have you integrated this into your work as a therapist beautifully. I didn't even ask it. So
yeah.
Well, we are we're living in, I guess every time people could say it's the best of times and the worst of times, as Dickens said once. But we are living in some difficult times, having gone through and still continuing this global pandemic with COVID. There are disruptions in the world with the current invasion of Ukraine by Russia. So we're living in some difficult times. And how do you see community building as being relevant during times like this?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like it could be so intensely relevant. And I know earlier in the community building movement, there were efforts to use it to help with international relations, or even like, I think maybe the Israel-Palestine conflict. There are places like that. And I don't know how far that went or how successful it was. It on the face of it, it seems like that should be just so helpful. And yet it doesn't seem to have found sort of broad purchase in that way. And I still hope and dream that one day it will be. Yeah, because I can't imagine a better way to try and resolve differences or work with differences than through community building. But I have been thinking about it a lot, and I think there are some limitations that I'm not sure about, like why they are there, but I think maybe there would be some modifications of the model that could be helpful in that way. Because one of the things I've noticed is community building seems to appeal primarily to well-educated, middle-aged or older white people. There are sometimes people of color in the weekend workshops, but they often don't come back. And excuse me. And I'm not sure, because community building is meant to be so inclusive, but I have been wondering if maybe the whole push to be as vulnerable as one can possibly be needs some modification or needs some softening at the beginning to help people ease into it more. And if maybe there needs to be, for instance, on a weekend workshop, if there needs to be a bit of a debriefing even after the first day and some support for people, because people are scared. I still get scared to be vulnerable sometimes. And so being there for the first time, or if you are in a situation where you're trying to solve a conflict, you know, on a national or even international level, I mean, to be vulnerable in a setting like that would perhaps seem entirely impossible to some people. So again, I'm you know, I don't want to go on about this, but I think there could be maybe some benefit in really looking at that a bit more. Because again, it's like it's so wonderful. It has so many things to offer, this model, and I think we need to keep looking at how can we get the word out there more and make sure people not only are aware, but also that, again, it's maybe also modified a bit depending on the cultural group or the country or whatever. So yeah, so I hope somebody's going to do that work. It probably won't be me, but feels important.
Yeah. Well, that's certainly something I'd like to have a conversation with you at some point, because, you know, outside of this, because a lot of the work I've done by bringing community building is in communities of color. And it's certainly not the case with a lot of the mainstream things that the public workshops and things like that. But I certainly have found that it does translate very well. In fact, even more powerfully in many ways. Which is a whole other conversation, but I think it's a great thing to explore. I think you're bringing up something really important, which is the willingness to contextualize and consider cultural differences in presentation. I think there are some things that definitely, even the stories that are told and some things like that are really important. And I want to go back to something else you said about this, is that what struck me when you were speaking was that the community building really is a tool for disarmament. We talk about disarmament with regard to weapons, but that really is what happens in the interpersonal relationships. And you know, we start out arming ourselves, and then it's that willingness to put the arms down, so to speak, and be vulnerable and open to the other that happens. So perhaps there is some chance there of using it in some broader sense. So wow.
But yeah, I do definitely think it's more relevant than it has ever been. And I do hope that, you know, things like this, or we'll get the word out to more people, because I think a lot of people don't even know about it. And
it's definitely the case is that, you know, when Scott Peck was around giving lectures all over the country, and people were learning about it through his books, there was a lot of exposure, but in the last 20 years or so, maybe not quite that long, but it's that's not the case. So and yet, as you're saying, it's still of a great value, and it's still relevant today. It's not some passé thing from the 60s or 70s or 80s or whenever.
No, I don't think so at all.
Yeah. So, well, anything else in closing you'd like to add about the process or the impact that it's had on your life as we start to wrap this up? It's been very helpful and interesting, your stories, insights.
I think the one dream I still have is to one day live in a setting where I can practice community building with people each and every single day. And one of the wonderful things that I noticed in the retreats that my ongoing group has done is any practical task or problem that comes up during a weekend like that is usually so easily solved. Or even if it's not easy, it's with so much respect and love that it gets solved. And so I really long for the opportunity to use that foundation to deal with everyday life. And as much as community building like weaves for everything that I do and that I am every day, but it's a whole other thing to be able to live with a community of people and again solve practical tasks, solve emotional tasks, and celebrate together when you still have that foundation of community building. So that's a dream that I hope to still be able to put into practice one day.
Well, that's a beautiful dream to have, and it's almost as if the what it makes me think of is that the weekend workshop is a kind of a laboratory, and then the ongoing group is practice and applying the findings from the laboratory, and then ultimately it's about bringing it into life, isn't it? Which is what you're really speaking to, and it's a learning laboratory, if nothing else, you know, for life.
Yeah, well put.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate your time, your wisdom, your continuing hard work to try to live this work.
Well, right back at you, Eve. It was wonderful. Thank you so much for letting me do this.
Thank you so much.
I didn't think I'd have anything to say that hasn't been said already, but you know, I think it was very interesting and rewarding for me to think about these things, and I hope that a lot of people will give it a try if they haven't already.
Well, great. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
See you.
Bye.